Well, with Aiden in deep production of Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, I decided we'd continue on our side series of Ultimate Alliance and X-Men Legends games. X-Men Legends 2 Rise of Apocalypse was the second game in the franchise, arriving to Xbox, GameCube, PS2, and PC, with separate PSP and N-Gage ports also releasing. The game was announced exactly a month after the release of X-Men Legends, and with the thesis to not reinvent too much from the core concepts of the original game, but to expand the scope of the game as much as possible, adding new characters and creating a series of overworlds where the team would enter levels in. Additionally, the levels themselves were expanded to be more maze-like and have essential items hidden throughout. The cinematics were impressive for this era in gaming, and were completed by Blur Studio, who worked on a number of games and films and other media like amusement park rides. The story sees Apocalypse return following a long exile, and the Brotherhood of Mutants and the X-Men must team up to defeat Apocalypse and his series of goons. Again, the story is pretty flat, but you occasionally get mission briefings from Professor X as well as dialogue prompts from other characters, which attempt to add some context to the scenarios the game puts you in. I won't go over the characters that we already covered in X-Men Legends 1, since that seems fairly redundant, but I will add some context to the characters added to this game that weren't in the first game. I don't want to be too redundant though. Bishop first appeared in X-Men 282, with 283 adding more context to his character than his brief initial appearance, and he's a ranged combat character that comes from a dystopian future to join the modern X-Men and work with them to stop the possible future he is from happening. Bishop is primarily a range and energy character that isn't quite as focus heavy as some heroes like Storm. He's a bit more of a mixed fighter. I didn't really love playing as him though. Colossus returns from the first game, and he's kind of a physical fighter and tank, with his might skill being fairly useful. Cyclops returns from the first game and is a powerful range fighter who is focus heavy with some leadership and combo moves. He again made our main roster. Gambit is a character on the base roster in this game rather than being unlockable. He's a solid mix of physical and focus. Since he was on the base roster in this version, we added him to our main team throughout the duration of the game in place of Rogue. Iceman returns and is again a focus-heavy character, freeze powers and what have you. Jean Grey returns and also is an energy-heavy character. For this time, we omitted her from our team in favor of Storm, who started heavier on energy and had her more powerful invincibility special move that was essential to completing the post-game Danger Room missions. Kane Marco, the Juggernaut, was upgraded from being a boss in X-Men Legends to a playable character and main member of the lineup in this game. He first appeared in X-Men 12 from 1965 and is the stepbrother of Professor Xavier, whose mom married Juggernaut's father. He's a huge behemoth with a simple brain, unlike Professor Xavier, who's small and brittle, but mentally very strong. Xavier is more mind than strength, and Juggernaut is more strength than mind. It's kind of the contrast that makes the relationship pretty interesting between these two characters. Magneto was the main antagonist of X-Men Legends, but here he is on the squad from the very first mission of the game. Originating in X-Men number 1, he has been a consistent character in the X-Men comics line, either acting as a hero, villain, neutral party, something in between. He's a strong leader and has a complicated relationship with Professor Xavier, who's both a friend and a rival of. He's also an energy character, but we never figured out a great way to utilize him in the game, and we didn't really like his special attack. Nightcrawler returns with his teleport-heavy moveset intact. We didn't end up using him in this one, but he was pretty okay when we had to use him for the Danger Room missions. Rogue is back in this game. We didn't run her this time, but she's still heavily combat-focused and has flying and might, which occasionally is essential to completing some puzzles in the overworld to find Iron Man tokens and stuff like that. Scarlet Witch is in the game as a playable character, and like Jean or Storm, is an energy-heavy character. Scarlet Witch was introduced in X-Men number 4 along with her brother Pedro. They started as members of the Brotherhood of Mutants, but eventually became more of Avengers characters, and even further eventually being revealed to be Magneto's kids nearly 20 years into their existence. This, however, was retconned during 2014's Axis event, which retcons the fact that her and Pedro were ever even mutants, let alone Magneto's kids. A blatant attempt to further separate the pair from X-Men, which Marvel was trying to essentially write out of existence at the time in the comics, since they were butthurt they didn't have the film rights when Fox did. Conveniently, Scarlet Witch's character would be introduced as an Avenger in the MCU around this time, which might further explain why they were trying to further her from her mutant heritage. Storm is in the roster from the first game and doesn't have many changes except her super OP invincible super move, which is essential to beating certain missions. Sunfire is a new addition to the roster and is an energy-heavy character. He first appeared in X-Men 64. He's basically a powerful fire-based mutant from Japan. He's cool, but I admittedly never read a ton of his material from the comics. Toad is another new addition, and is a classic Brotherhood of Mutants member, also being introduced alongside the Brotherhood in X-Men number 4, and continuing to be a key long-term member of that team, being adapted pretty frequently for whatever reason into other media, this included obviously. In case you were worried, yes, Wolverine is back on the roster. He plays basically the same and continued to be my main in this game. He's the only character I'm positive is in all 5 Ultimate Alliance games, but I think Cyclops, Jean Grey, Storm, and Iceman may be too. I'm least sure about Iceman, but the other 4, I'm pretty positive he is. I think they're kind of the default X-Men reps, but Ultimate Alliance 2 is a bit of a blind spot for me since I never beat that one entirely. Aiden and I made the mistake of buying that game on the Wii on launch day, and we got like halfway through it, but the waggle was just too much and the leveling system was too complex for our tiny child brains. There are 3 unlockable characters in this game, all of which are unlockable very late in the game due to various requirements. Deadpool is the first character, and he has healing, teleportation, and a mix of physical and energy moves. He is unlocked once you beat the game. Deadpool first appeared in New Mutants 98 as a minor villain and a blatant Marvel ripoff of Deathstroke. I mean, look at these two. They look pretty similar. Also, Deathstroke's name is Slade Wilson and Deadpool's is Wade Wilson. It's pretty blatant. Eventually, Deadpool would get goofier and goofier and would end up being Marvel's premier gag character, and from a pop culture standpoint is now up there in popularity with Spider-Man as one of Marvel's multimedia stars. Deadpool's rise to fame was gradual, from being kind of a cult character in some comic circles to just blatantly famous, especially after Ryan Reynolds and company took the character and ran with him, making him a multimedia phenomenon. I never loved Deadpool though. I thought he was annoying, and before he was a breakout character, he was just a fairly easy cosplay annoying people wore at Comic-Con to sexually harass women and bother people, and yell chimichangas. He was fucking cringy, so, you know, I'm not super charmed by the fact that sexual harassment lawsuit guy from Comic-Con was brought to the big screen, but whatever. Anyways, we all know him now. I don't love talking about Deadpool, so I suppose this is going to be my excuse. I'm sure I'll have to talk about him in the future, but for now, let's leave it at that. Iron Man is sort of an oddball character, being one of the characters on the roster that isn't an X-Men at all, and doesn't really interact with the team on any sort of regular basis beyond company-wide crossovers in the comics and stuff like that. Nick Fury cameos in a scene in the game, but is also not an X-Man. These are the 2 only non-X-Men originating characters in the entire game. Iron Man first appeared in Tales of Suspense 39, and much like Deadpool was a well-known comic character at the time, but it wasn't until the long-awaited film adaptation starring Robert Downey Jr. as the titular Iron Man came out that the character grew to have a major fan base outside of comic circles. In the game, Tony Stark was, for some reason, captured by Apocalypse, and in each act of the game, which comprises around 6 missions each, Iron Man beacons are placed in the missions. If you find 4 in the act, a quick bonus level is unlocked, in which you will unlock an Iron Man armor part. Once you do this for all 5 acts, you can unlock Iron Man. This happens as early as level 2 before the game ends. Iron Man will also be powered to the same level as all the inactive heroes, which in our case was around level 28 when we got him, making him relatively usable, if a bit underpowered compared to our standard party. He's an energy-heavy character, but holds his own physically. He can fly and has health regeneration like Wolverine, and apparently has a move that can respawn him without needing to be revived at a checkpoint. He seems pretty strong, but we never got to try that move. Finally, we have Professor X, who you can play as. Unlike the first game, he's fully able to be added to your party, rather than just being playable in story segments, like in the first game. He is unlocked by collecting all the Danger Room discs and beating the coinciding levels. These levels are mostly easy, but the protection missions can be tough if you don't use Storm's invincibility power-up, which makes them next to impossible for you to fail. There are also some exclusive characters that are only on certain ports of the game, which I didn't play, so I won't talk about them too much, but here they are. On PSP, they added Cable, Cannonball, Dark Phoenix, and X-Man. The PC added Pyro and Sabretooth, and the N-Gage port had Beast. I think these are some cool characters I missed out on, but whatever. I like the GameCube version. I don't really see them ending up being on my team, except possibly Sabretooth, who I imagine is a Wolverine clone. X-Men Legends 2 gameplay hasn't really changed much. What changed was the level design and layout. Rather than being sent into these long, fairly linear levels, the levels are now a bit shorter relatively, but are more maze-like and have branching paths. To unlock all the characters most efficiently, you need the Danger Room discs as well as the Iron Man beacon, so essentially, deep dive exploration the first time is necessary. Thankfully, the few missions that have time limits are not nearly as grueling or monotonous as the first game, so that's pretty solid. Aiden and my strategy really didn't differ much from the first game. We went with a strong range character and a strong physical character, respectively, in this game. In this case, pulling over the mains from the first game, Wolverine and Cyclops, but this time replacing Jean Grey with Storm as our energy character, and Rogue with Gambit as our all-around character, both of whom were originally unlockable characters in the previous entry in this series. You see, the gradual unlock from the first game means if you want to sub in new characters, even with progressive background leveling means those characters will be a bit weak. So unlocking all but 3 bonus special characters from the start I think allowed for more feasible expansions to character rosters that allowed you to go through more characters on your first playthrough. We ended up adding Iron Man after we unlocked him to give him a try, plus being that we had health restore and were definitely over leveled by this point, it seemed like a fun idea. He also held his own fine, so it worked out and was definitely an interesting play. The game features all kinds of bosses, but none of the characters you fight are going to be nearly as iconic as a lot of the guys from the first game, with the exception of possibly Archangel, who is a possessed version of Angel, and Apocalypse. Other bosses include Grizzly, Garrock, Sugarman, and the Stepford Cuckolds, Holocaust, and Deadpool before he was playable. Mr. Sinister and Living Monolith are also a couple iconic characters that make it in here. The bosses are okay, but honestly, again, are so easy, not many of them are memorable. I think the Apocalypse fight was fun, where you harness the power of the 4 horsemen and have to beat him down a bunch as these pillars respawn him, but honestly, none of the other bosses are even passively memorable, in part because people like Sugarman don't really look that interesting, and I only remember Sugarman because, like, what kind of name is that? Graphically, the game isn't a massive leap over the first. After all, it's still a massive AAA game from the time, with components from the first game. I will say the costume changes really helped tell the X-Men apart. I complimented the silhouettes of the characters in the first video, and that helped a lot, but in my opinion, the switch from the Ultimate Comics-based costumes of the original game to allow you to select different costumes, like classic costumes and different alts from throughout the history of the characters, was also nice. It also allows for more variety in how the team looks in-game and makes telling who's who a bit easier. I also just don't like very many of the Ultimate Comics costumes for the X-Men very much, so it was a nice addition. And looking through and selecting costumes always gets to me, especially in superhero games, since I think it's a fun way to show a bit of flair. And it also allows me to bring my favorite multimedia costumes to the game. Good stuff. Gregor Narholes, who's worked on all sorts of film, video game, and even YouTube video projects, did the music, and I didn't notice. It never got grading for me, which was good, but I guess it was just okay background music, nothing too memorable. A lot of the original game's glitches and bugs are no longer present here. The door thing I complained about last time, where you get stuck in the door and blocked by a computer character, didn't really happen to me here. I think it happened once very moderately, but I didn't need to like hop to another character and manually move them out of the way. It worked fine. No falling through floors either, and everything worked how it should. The only complaint I might have is there was a little bit of slowdown in the shield mission when you're fighting like 10 sentinels at once. But even if it chugged a bit, it wasn't really affecting the gameplay, other than the moment-to-moment frame rate. But otherwise, it was pretty consistent from a frame rate perspective throughout the rest of the game. It was only when there were that many characters on screen that the game was straining a little bit. Overall, the game added a bit more polish, and it felt really solid, without any major breaks. So yeah, in conclusion, I liked X-Men Legends 2 Rise of Apocalypse more than the first game. I think both are really solid beat-em-up arcade-style games though, so the fact that Ravensoft kind of just did more of the same was fine with me. I've had these on my beat list for like 15 years. I got them used at Blockbuster way back, and I'm happy I finally got around to this duology and look forward to moving into the Ultimate Alliance series proper. Of course, we have a quick speed bump though before we get to Ultimate Alliance, since 1 week to the day before the next game in the series, Marvel Ultimate Alliance would release, another competing game would release in the same style, Justice League Heroes from DC, Warner Brothers, and Snowblind Studios, who created a series of Dungeons & Dragons games that would go on to inspire X-Men Legends and its format. I guess they weren't content with watching Ravensoft use a similar format from the sidelines, and since Ravensoft already had the license to Marvel characters, why not do one for the Justice League? Anyways, in perhaps a petty move, they released it 1 week before Ultimate Alliance. Regardless, after reading into the game a bit and briefly being shown it by my friend Colin a couple years ago, I knew I had to try playing it myself and seeing if it holds up to Ravensoft's competing game franchise. X-Men Legends 2 reviewed very well back in the day, with it landing around 80% on all consoles on Metacritic, with Ravensoft, Activision, and Marvel working together right away to start developing Marvel Ultimate Alliance, which would expand the licensed characters from almost exclusively X-Men characters to characters from throughout the Marvel Universe. Next up for me is going to be a look back at The Empire Strikes Back though. Aiden is nearing completion on Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, with the video, as I'm writing this video, finishing the writing process and is going to be going into editing, so we can expect that in the next couple weeks. I'm obviously working on Justice League Heroes with Aiden, as I just stated. Arkham City I've been playing for a while, that's still cooking. Zack Snyder's Justice League is written. Batman the Animated Series Season 1 I've been working on for a long time. Star Wars Dark Forces' novel. Mark Waid's The Flash I've been reading. And I plan on getting to No Time to Die to re-round out my very long James Bond video and kind of get that franchise back up to date with my reviews. I'm very busy, but working hard, so stay tuned for next time. Sorry, videos have been a little sporadic these last couple weeks. I've been busy with work, but I should be back to my normal schedule of 1 or 2 videos a week, depending on how much time I have.